The billionaire single dad had built his life around precision, control, and an endless stream of work that left little room for unpredictability. His days were carefully scheduled from the moment he woke up until late at night, filled with meetings, calls, and decisions that affected millions. He had mastered the art of efficiency, always knowing what needed to be done next, always a step ahead of everyone else. Yet, when it came to his personal life, especially after the sudden loss of his spouse, he found himself utterly unprepared. The house that had once been filled with laughter and routine now felt cavernous and echoing. Every room a reminder of absence, every corner a silent witness to the life he had lost. His baby, barely a few months old, became the center of this new, uncharted existence. Demanding attention he was both eager to give and incapable of fully managing. It wasn't that he didn't love his child. It was that he didn't know how to navigate the world of diapers, feedings, and sleepless nights while simultaneously running a business empire. That was why, after much deliberation and recommendations from friends, family, and even his personal assistant who had witnessed his daily struggles, he made the decision to hire a nanny, a professional, someone who could provide the care, guidance, and warmth that he simply didn't have the bandwidth to supply consistently. The process of hiring the nanny was itself meticulous, almost corporate in nature. He interviewed several candidates, each one presenting resumes that read like job applications for a top-tier executive assistant rather than childcare. He asked detailed questions about experience, philosophy of care, crisis management, and even about how each would handle potential emergencies. He scrutinized references, checked backgrounds, and observed their interactions with other children, looking for a combination of competence, warmth, and intuition that was impossible to quantify, but absolutely necessary. After weeks of searching, he narrowed it down to one candidate, a woman whose resume was impressive, but whose presence carried a quiet confidence that felt instinctively right. She wasn't flashy or overbearing, but she had a calm demeanor that suggested patience and adaptability. The decision was not easy. He felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety as he finalized the hiring. He wondered if he could truly trust someone to care for his most precious possession, someone who was essentially entering the private, sacred world of his family. The first days were awkward, filled with instruction manuals, strict schedules, and constant oversight. He hovered, watching her every move, correcting minor details, offering suggestions even when they weren't asked for, a behavior born more out of fear than distrust. Despite his initial rigidity, he began to notice subtle ways in which she understood his child, tiny cues, unspoken signals, a sense of timing that he could never have mastered in those early months. She knew when to soothe, when to distract, when to let the baby explore the world safely, and when to intervene. Her presence began to create a rhythm in the household that had been absent for months. He saw his child respond to her with smiles, coos, and trust, and slowly, he began to feel the weight of his own limitations in a new light. This wasn't just someone helping him manage logistics. This was someone entering the emotional fabric of his life, someone who was becoming indispensable in ways he hadn't anticipated. The billionaire, used to being in control of every aspect of his empire, was forced to confront the reality that some things were beyond spreadsheets, contracts, and strategies. Human connection, especially in the fragile, formative world of an infant, required a kind of surrender he had never practiced. He had hired a nanny to fill a practical need, but he was beginning to see that she offered something far more profound, a bridge between the regimented world he inhabited and the tender, unpredictable life of his child. The act of bringing her into his home was not merely transactional. It was symbolic of his willingness to open his personal life to another adult, to allow someone else to share responsibility, to trust that the love and care she provided would complement, not compete with, his own. Even as he continued to juggle board meetings and financial decisions, he found himself observing her interactions, noting the small ways she engaged, the patience she exhibited, and the joy she could evoke in a being so young and impressionable. Each day, he witnessed the subtle transformation in his household, how her presence shifted the tone from sterile efficiency to a quieter, more human rhythm. She wasn't just feeding the baby or changing diapers. She was teaching him, in small, almost invisible ways, what it meant to nurture, to anticipate, and to respond to life's immediate needs without a business plan in place. Her methods contrasted sharply with his analytical mindset, yet they worked. She introduced routines that balanced structure with flexibility, discipline with warmth, predictability with spontaneity, creating an environment where his child could thrive emotionally as well as physically. In those early weeks, he became acutely aware of the delicate balance required in caring for an infant, the constant attentiveness, the intuitive adjustments, and the patience that had to be maintained even during moments of exhaustion. He realized that his own attempts to micromanage had often resulted in tension and missed cues, whereas her calm expertise allowed the baby to settle into a natural rhythm, one that even he could observe and gradually learn from. Over time, this initial decision to hire a nanny, which had seemed like a simple solution to a practical problem, began to reveal layers of impact that reached far beyond logistics. She was becoming a stabilizing force, a guide, and a subtle teacher in the art of parenthood, a role that the billionaire had not anticipated but was slowly beginning to appreciate in ways he couldn't yet fully articulate. The day he walked into the nursery was like any other, or so he thought. He had returned from a long morning of back-to-back meetings, phone calls, and strategic briefings, expecting to find his home in the usual state of quiet, controlled chaos. But as he pushed open the nursery door, he froze. There she was, the nanny, cradling his baby in her arms, bottle in hand, humming softly under her breath, a scene so intimate and domestic that it momentarily disoriented him. His first instinct was surprise, a jolt of something he hadn't expected in the meticulously organized rhythm of his life. He had hired her to help, yes, but he hadn't anticipated walking in and seeing her in the middle of a task so personal, so inherently tied to the vulnerability of his child. The sight triggered a swirl of conflicting emotions, gratitude for her diligence, pride in having a caregiver who clearly understood his child's needs, and an unsettling sense of intrusion, as if his carefully maintained boundaries had been crossed without his consent. He stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to announce his presence or retreat, and in that pause, he felt the full weight of his role as both a father and a man accustomed to control. The nanny's calmness in the moment only amplified his internal chaos. She did not flinch or look up immediately. Instead, she continued feeding, adjusting the bottle gently, maintaining eye contact with the baby, whispering words that were soothing and familiar. It was a display of attentiveness so natural that it contrasted sharply with the rigid, structured way he often approached parenthood. He realized then that he was an outsider to this intimate moment, and that the very nature of trust he had extended to her was being put on display in real time. A part of him wanted to step forward, to assert his presence, to reclaim a role he felt instinctively was his alone, but another part, the part that had hired her after weeks of deliberation, knew that interfering would disrupt the delicate balance she had established. His mind raced through possibilities. Had he misunderstood her schedule? Was she doing something she shouldn't be? But no, every gesture was careful, professional, and yet tender in a way that transcended mere duty. As he watched, he began noticing details he had never seen before. The subtle way she rocked the baby just enough to soothe restlessness, the gentle tapping on the back, the patient timing between sips of the bottle, the small adjustments to the swaddle that kept the infant comfortable. Each movement seemed instinctive, almost imperceptible, yet it spoke volumes about her understanding of a baby's needs. The realization hit him that she was not just following instructions. She was reading the baby in a language he had not yet mastered, responding to cues he might have missed entirely, translating the child's needs into actions that brought immediate comfort. He felt a twinge of guilt, a recognition that despite his wealth and capacity to provide materially, there were aspects of care, emotional, intuitive, human, that he could not replicate, not yet. That moment forced him to confront the limitations of his own experience, the gap between his intentions and the tangible expressions of nurturing his baby required. As he stood there, the sound of the baby's soft coos and the quiet rhythm of feeding created an environment of intimacy and connection that contrasted sharply with the corporate environments he navigated daily. The sterile boardrooms, the sharp angles of glass offices, the constant hum of strategy and finance. All of it faded into irrelevance in the face of this small, immediate universe where every decision, every movement, every word mattered. And yet, despite the overwhelming tenderness of the scene, there was an undercurrent of tension in him. He questioned himself. Did he need to intervene? Was it appropriate to watch without participating? The answer was not clear, and he realized that part of trusting someone else with his child was relinquishing control in moments like these, observing from the periphery without disrupting the delicate flow she had established. The initial shock began to give way to something more reflective. He noticed how the baby's eyes followed her movements, how tiny hands grasped instinctively at the bottle, how the sound of her voice seemed to anchor the child in a sense of security he could not yet provide on his own. Each small observation layered upon the next, deepening his appreciation for the skill, patience, and care she brought into their lives. There was also a subtle lesson in boundaries, how someone else's competence could coexist with his authority, how sharing responsibility did not diminish his role as a father, but instead enhanced the overall environment of care. Even in that short moment, he realized that his expectations of control were being reshaped, that the way he measured contribution and impact in his life outside the nursery could not simply be transferred to the intimate, fluid, and highly nuanced world of infant care. Watching her, he began to understand that caregiving was not merely transactional, not something that could be quantified in hours or tasks completed. It was a continuous, responsive dialogue between the caregiver and the child, one that required emotional intelligence, observation, and adaptability in a way that his high-powered business acumen did not necessarily prepare him for. The initial shock of seeing the nanny feeding his baby gave way to a tension he hadn't anticipated, a strange knot of anxiety, curiosity, and defensiveness that coiled in his chest. He was used to being in control, to orchestrating every outcome in his life with precision, whether in business or personal affairs. Yet here, in the nursery of his own home, he felt disarmed. The nanny's calm and confident demeanor only heightened the contrast, highlighting his own discomfort in a way that made him acutely aware of his insecurities. He wanted to step forward, to assert his presence, to remind himself and her that he was the parent, the authority figure, but the words and movements that would normally flow naturally in situations of command felt caught somewhere between thought and action. The baby, oblivious to the tension in the room, continued to feed with small, trusting motions, eyes blinking lazily, hands occasionally twitching toward the bottle or toward the nanny's gentle touch. The scene was deceptively serene, yet the billionaire felt a storm of conflicting emotions brewing. He recognized the absurdity of some of his reactions, realizing that he was grappling not with any immediate threat, but with his own expectations, his own deeply ingrained need to control every situation. Every instinct screamed to intervene, to make adjustments, to guide the interaction. Yet another part of him, the part that had hired her carefully after weeks of deliberation, urged patience, observation, and trust. It was a lesson in restraint, one he had seldom practiced in other areas of his life, and it left him unsettled. He couldn't ignore the subtle power dynamics that were unfolding in the room. He was the father, the decision-maker, the provider, yet in this moment, the nanny held a different kind of authority, the authority of expertise, of intuitive understanding, of quiet competence. She moved with a fluidity he had never achieved, responding to the baby's smallest cues with a precision that made him pause. Each gesture was measured, deliberate, and infused with a calm confidence that contrasted sharply with his own sometimes rigid and analytical approach. This realization sparked a tension within him, a blend of admiration, unease, and a touch of defensiveness. He found himself questioning assumptions he hadn't even realized he held, assumptions about what it meant to care for a child, assumptions about who was capable, assumptions about his own role. He noticed himself scanning the room for minor imperfections, small details that he might adjust. A swaddle slightly askew, a bottle held at an angle he wouldn't have chosen, a hum or murmur that didn't match his internal rhythm. Yet as he observed more closely, he realized that each of these deviations was irrelevant in terms of the baby's comfort and well-being. The tension wasn't rooted in any tangible problem, but in the clash between his expectations and reality. There was also a social tension he hadn't anticipated. The nanny, aware of his presence, occasionally glanced up, offering a small, polite smile that acknowledged him without interrupting the flow of care. That brief exchange carried a quiet negotiation of roles. She was competent, confident, and professional, yet she also recognized his authority as the parent. He found himself weighing each subtle look and movement, interpreting intent, assessing tone, and measuring the boundaries of their interaction. It was exhausting in a way that reminded him of high-stakes boardroom meetings, yet different, more personal, more intimate, more emotionally charged. He realized that trust, in this context, was not a single decision but a series of continuous, small acts of negotiation, observation, and adaptation. Every second of the feeding carried implicit lessons in patience, humility, and self-awareness. Even the baby's reactions contributed to the tension. Every coo, squirm, or blink was a signal that he struggled to interpret. The nanny responded almost instinctively, adjusting posture, tone, and rhythm without hesitation. He observed how she anticipated needs before they became demands, a skill he had never needed to cultivate in his own life, where results were measured in metrics and projections rather than in the subtle, immediate cues of a tiny human. As he continued to watch, the tension began to evolve from a raw, defensive energy into something more reflective. He noticed that the initial discomfort he felt was a mirror, reflecting back at him the limits of his own experience and understanding. The tension was teaching him something about humility, about the necessity of stepping back and allowing someone else to operate in a space he had assumed belonged solely to him. It was uncomfortable, yes, but also instructive. He became aware of the ways in which he measured competence and contribution, recognizing that his criteria in business could not simply be applied to caregiving. In this context, value was not determined by efficiency or output, but by attentiveness, empathy, and the ability to respond fluidly to subtle signals. He felt a growing respect for the nanny's skill, tempered by an undercurrent of unease that he wasn't yet fully comfortable with the shift in dynamics. The tension was layered, between control and trust, between authority and expertise, between observation and intervention, and it challenged him to confront aspects of his personality and assumptions that he had long taken for granted. As the initial shock and tension began to settle, the nanny spoke, her words carrying a calm authority that immediately captured his attention. It wasn't the way she spoke, necessarily, but the weight behind what she revealed that made the billionaire single dad pause. She began to explain her approach to caregiving, sharing insights that were both practical and profoundly human, a blend of experience, instinct, and personal philosophy that he had never considered in the structured, results-driven world he inhabited. She told him about the importance of observing a baby's cues, of understanding the subtle variations in crying, cooing, and body language, and of responding not just with routine, but with intuition. She shared anecdotes from her past experiences, moments when she had anticipated a need before it was verbalized, times when small adjustments had prevented tears or discomfort, all while maintaining a sense of calm and connection. What struck him most was the honesty in her voice, the acknowledgement that caregiving was not about control, but about presence, patience, and empathy. She described a philosophy that emphasized trust, both in the child and in herself, a balance of guidance and freedom that allowed the baby to feel secure while also exploring the world within safe boundaries. Her words carried a quiet confidence, not brash or overbearing, but the kind of self-assuredness that comes from having navigated challenges and learned lessons over time. As she spoke, He realized that much of what she was describing contrasted sharply with his own approach to life. In business, success was measured in measurable outcomes, in timelines, profits, and influence. There was a clarity, a tangible metric for every effort. In caregiving, however, the rules were invisible, the results were subtle, and the impact was often felt rather than seen. The nanny's explanation illuminated this difference in a way that was almost revelatory. She shared personal stories of infants who responded to patience rather than urgency, to consistency rather than control, to emotional attunement rather than rigid schedules. Each story carried a lesson, and he found himself mentally cataloging them, realizing that these small moments of insight were shaping the baby's experience in ways that were invisible but crucial. He began to understand that her presence was not merely functional but transformative. She wasn't just feeding the child or changing diapers. She was building trust, fostering security, and establishing a foundation of emotional intelligence that would carry through the baby's life. The magnitude of what she was contributing slowly sank in, and with it came a mixture of awe, gratitude, and a hint of insecurity. The billionaire was used to being the architect of his environment, the strategist who mapped outcomes and ensured success. Here, he was confronted with the reality that someone else's expertise, different from his own but equally valuable, was shaping his child's development in profound ways. He began to see the nanny not as a temporary helper, but as a partner in the most intimate and significant aspect of his life. The surprising truth she revealed went beyond technique or method. She spoke candidly about her own life, the challenges she had faced, the lessons she had learned, and the reasons she approached caregiving with the level of care she did. She described a personal philosophy that intertwined discipline with empathy, structure with flexibility, authority with tenderness. The depth of her insight revealed a woman who had not only mastered the practical elements of childcare, but had also cultivated an emotional intelligence that allowed her to navigate the unpredictable, sensitive, and evolving world of an infant with grace. He realized that her calm demeanor, her patient gestures, and her intuitive responses were not accidental, but the product of years of experience and reflection. This understanding reframed the way he viewed the dynamic between them. It wasn't simply employer and employee. It was a shared responsibility, a collaboration grounded in respect, trust, and mutual recognition of each other's role. As she continued to speak, he noticed the subtle ways in which she engaged the baby, how she encouraged tiny movements, how she responded to each sound, how she used touch, tone, and timing to create an environment that was both safe and stimulating. Each action was deliberate, yet natural, demonstrating a deep understanding that extended beyond the mechanics of feeding and caregiving. Her revelations also prompted him to reflect on his own limitations. He recognized the assumptions he had made about his ability to provide care in the same way, the blind spots in his understanding, and the ways in which his approach had been informed by efficiency rather than empathy. He began to appreciate that her methods were not only effective but essential, that the baby's comfort, growth, and sense of security depended on her presence and skill. There was an unexpected humility in that realization, a recognition that even with wealth, resources, and influence, there were aspects of life that required learning, observation, and trust in someone else's expertise. He listened more intently as she elaborated on her techniques for creating routines, for anticipating needs before they arose, and for fostering emotional connection. The billionaire started to see that what he had initially perceived as a simple, transactional role, hiring someone to assist with childcare, was actually a deep, intricate, and profoundly human contribution that shaped the daily experience and long-term development of his child. After hearing the nanny's explanations and witnessing her skill firsthand, the billionaire's single dad found himself reassessing his assumptions in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had entered this situation with a clear set of expectations, that he would provide guidance, establish rules, and maintain ultimate control over his household and his child's care. He believed that hiring a nanny was a practical solution to a logistical problem, a way to ensure the baby was fed, changed, and safe while he managed his demanding career. Yet, as he watched her interact with his child and listened to her philosophy, he realized that his assumptions about authority, competence, and the role of caregiving had been incomplete. He had underestimated the depth of expertise required to care for an infant, the intuition and emotional intelligence necessary to anticipate needs and respond to them effectively. It wasn't just about following a schedule or performing tasks. It was about understanding a tiny human in a language that was almost invisible to the untrained eye. He recognized that his previous conception of being a parent, structured, disciplined, and always in control, was only one layer of what his child truly needed. Observing the nanny, he saw how she navigated moments of fussiness, discomfort, or uncertainty with a patience and grace he struggled to emulate. She didn't rush, scold, or attempt to force compliance. Instead, she tuned into subtle cues, adjusted her approach, and created an environment that was simultaneously structured and flexible. The billionaire realized that parenting required more than planning and decisiveness. It required empathy, presence, and the willingness to surrender to moments that could not be managed with spreadsheets or schedules. This insight prompted a deeper reflection on his own habits and mindset. He began to question why he had assumed that control equaled competence, that oversight equaled effectiveness. In the world of business, those assumptions often held true, but in the delicate ecosystem of caregiving, they were insufficient. He saw how his attempts to micromanage, even in small ways, could disrupt the natural flow of interaction between the nanny and his child. He began to appreciate that his role as a father was not diminished by her expertise. Rather, it was enhanced when he allowed her to operate with autonomy. He started to reassess what it truly meant to support, protect, and nurture, understanding that being present and attentive in moments of connection was as critical as any decision he made outside the home. The experience also forced him to confront his own vulnerabilities and biases. He realized that his initial skepticism toward the nanny, his assumptions about her capabilities based on brief interactions and surface impressions, had been a reflection of his own insecurities. The trust he had hesitated to extend was not a critique of her abilities, but a mirror of his discomfort with relinquishing control and acknowledging that someone else could contribute in a meaningful, indispensable way. This self-awareness was uncomfortable yet enlightening, pushing him to expand his understanding of collaboration and partnership in a context far more intimate than any boardroom. He also began to notice the transformative effect this dynamic had on his child. The baby responded with increasing comfort, curiosity, and engagement, signaling a growing sense of security and trust. Observing these changes, he realized that his assumptions about what mattered most, efficiency, routines, predictability, were incomplete. Emotional attunement, responsiveness, and the subtle art of connection were equally vital, if not more so, in shaping his child's development. This revelation led him to reconsider how he measured success and value in his personal life. In business, success was quantifiable, tangible, and often celebrated. In parenting, it was cumulative, subtle, and often invisible, emerging in moments of calm, curiosity, and trust. He began to understand that reassessing his assumptions was not about relinquishing responsibility, but about redefining it in ways that incorporated humility, observation, and collaboration. It also prompted him to reflect on his own behaviors and attitudes. He realized that his inclination to control and direct stemmed from habits reinforced over years of high-stakes decision-making, and that those habits, while effective professionally, could limit his effectiveness and presence in the personal sphere. By observing the nanny and acknowledging her expertise, he was beginning to rewrite the script he had long followed, learning to step back when necessary, to trust, and to value contributions that differed from his own. The process of reassessing assumptions extended beyond the immediate dynamics of caregiving. It reshaped his understanding of relationships, trust, and authority in ways that felt profound and unexpected. He saw that leadership did not always mean giving orders or directing every action. Sometimes, it meant observing, supporting, and valuing the unique skills of others. This shift in perspective was gradual, subtle, and at times uncomfortable, but it was reshaping the way he thought about his role as a father, as a collaborator, and as a human being capable of learning, adapting, and growing. The outcome of the unexpected encounter in the nursery began to unfold in ways the billionaire single dad could never have predicted. What started as a routine day, with the simple act of a nanny feeding his baby, had gradually revealed layers of complexity, trust, and emotion that reshaped his perception of both his child and the people entrusted with their care. He realized that the events of that moment were more than a snapshot in time. They were catalysts, sparking change in the dynamics of his household, in his own understanding of parenthood, and in the relationships he had carefully constructed around him. The initial shock he felt had evolved into a profound recognition of the unseen influence the nanny wielded. Her calm competence and intuitive care created a ripple effect, altering not just the baby's immediate comfort, but the overall atmosphere of the home. The walls of his meticulously organized house, once sterile and impersonal, now felt infused with warmth, rhythm, and a sense of human connection that had been missing. He observed how the baby's reactions to her, smiles, coos, and relaxed movements, signaled a growing trust and security, a testament to the subtle yet powerful impact of consistent, thoughtful care. In witnessing these moments, he began to understand that the outcome of their interaction was far more significant than the surface task of feeding. It was about establishing emotional foundations, shaping early experiences, and creating bonds that would influence the baby's development for years to come. This realization prompted a deeper reflection on his own role. He recognized that being a parent was not simply about providing resources or enforcing routines. It was about presence, observation, and the willingness to learn from others who brought complementary skills to the table. The nanny's influence challenged his preconceptions, revealing that collaboration and caregiving could enhance, rather than diminish, his own authority and connection with his child. He started to notice changes within himself as well. The intense tension and cautious observation he had felt earlier gradually gave way to respect, gratitude, and a willingness to step back. He realized that his instincts to control every interaction were not always aligned with what was best for the child. Allowing the nanny to operate autonomously did not lessen his role as a father. Instead, it created space for him to observe, learn, and engage in a way that was more meaningful and effective. This shift in perspective was subtle but profound, reshaping his approach to daily routines, his interactions with the baby, and his overall philosophy of parenting. He began to appreciate the ways in which outcomes in life, particularly those involving relationships and human development, were not always linear or predictable. The unexpected nature of that moment, the surprise of walking into the nursery, the realization of her skill, and the insights she shared, underscored a truth he had long neglected, that the most impactful results often emerge from trust, patience, and openness to learning from others. He also recognized the broader implications for his household and personal life. The presence of someone who could contribute meaningfully to the child's care reshaped the dynamics between himself, the nanny, and the baby. It fostered a collaborative environment where authority and expertise were shared in a way that promoted growth, security, and emotional resilience. The billionaire could see how this dynamic created a positive feedback loop. The baby responded with trust and comfort, the nanny's confidence was reinforced, and he, in turn, gained insight and perspective that allowed him to engage more meaningfully. There was a subtle transformation in the household culture as well. The structured, controlled routines he had relied upon began to integrate with moments of spontaneity, intuition, and emotional responsiveness. Meals, nap times, and playtimes became less about rigid schedules and more about understanding needs, reading cues, and fostering connection. This shift influenced not just the baby's experience, but his own approach to life within the home. He became more attuned, more observant, and more willing to embrace unpredictability, recognizing that flexibility could coexist with structure and that trust could amplify effectiveness rather than compromise it. The outcome also extended into his personal growth. He noticed changes in his patience, empathy, and perspective on human relationships. The experience challenged him to reconsider assumptions about control, authority, and expertise, encouraging him to value contributions that differed from his own. He realized that influence was not always about being the most visible or vocal, but about recognizing and supporting the skills and instincts of others, and about fostering environments where those contributions could flourish. Gradually, he saw that this unexpected situation had created a lasting impact on his worldview. It was teaching him that some of life's most meaningful outcomes, whether in parenting, relationships, or personal development, emerged not from planning or control, but from openness, collaboration, and the willingness to let events unfold while observing, learning, and adapting in real time. Each day, as he watched the interactions between his child and the nanny, he became more aware of the subtle ways in which trust, care, and attention shaped experiences, reinforced bonds, and influenced growth in ways that were immediate and long-lasting.